Hello everybody, welcome back to the Art by Casey Brown YouTube channel. We got another request video here, really quick. Time lapse with a little bit of commentary over top. So here we go. This is another Instagram request, so head on over to my Instagram to wait for your opportunity to request some YouTube videos. This is just a really quick time lapse of some Bobwhite quail flushing up out of the grass, kind of a hunting scene or even just a nature walk kind of scene in areas with quail. I've got a bunch of different reference open here as I'm drawing this, and I'm just kind of flashing back and forth between a bunch of different pieces just to make sure I get kind of the flight pattern right. I've never really drawn quail before, so I wanted to make sure that I kind of understood how they fly. Not much different than a grouse, of course, which I've drawn quite a bit. So I'm just kind of going and making sure that I have a little bit of an interesting composition, a bunch of different flight positions, and you can see I just play around with shape and form a little bit. You see I cut the one wing off in my composition. It's kind of fun, it leads it out, it has more motion, feels like they're extending. You don't really know what's past there, a little bit of mystery. So here I'm just quickly throwing in some values. I want to keep this whole piece kind of loose, have it more of a painterly kind of a feel. So here you can see I'm just kind of chopping in some quick brush strokes. I mean, obviously not quite as quick as it's going on the time lapse here, but just kind of establishing some values. Where are my darks going to be? You can see I also use the eraser really quick to just kind of carve and chisel work in both directions a little bit, being able to add and take away to start developing some of the shape, the form, and a little bit of grass. You know, a little bit of tall grass for them to come fleshing out of. You can see some of the grass is just like big negative space, just kind of establish where some shadows and stuff are going to be. Add a little bit of light working in the other direction where some highlights going to be. So I got to really start figuring out what my lighting situation is. I mean, some of it's already been chosen by the positions of my shadows, but that can all be changed. So I'm starting to really ponder what the overall lighting situation is going to be. Here I just knock it back a little bit to start throwing some darker darks on. I start doing it really fine, and I'm thinking I'm going to do it really kind of, finished and perfect lines, but then you'll see I switch in a little bit here to a bigger brush size, soften it down a little bit, softer edges. But you can also pick where your focus is going to be. Maybe that area you're going to add a little bit more defined line. So yeah, here I've switched to a kind of wider brush. This bird I'm working on right now is probably my favorite of the bunch. It's kind of an interesting, really lifting off, jumping up kind of wing position. So as I'm doing this, I'm making more choices about the exact structure of things, where exactly the feathers are going to go, where my darkest values are going to be, all of which can still change. Nothing's really tied down completely. Nothing's in stone yet. So here I'm just kind of going in again, just kind of adding some dark values in and around on the grass. So what I've done now is I've added another layer, and I'm just going to go in behind and add this nice kind of lightening layer. I messed around with this quite a bit. What I'm doing is I'm trying to create a little bit more contrast from that background and even out the tones, because those are going to be a little bit harder to see because they're right in front of the light source. So I'm kind of imagining like an early morning flight of birds jumping up with a dim light in behind. Kind of foggy morning, I guess. So I'm trying to figure out my edges, which are going to be soft edges, which are going to be hard edges, and then right into some colors. So this is an overlay layer that I added on top, and I'm just trying to find out some of the right tones and colors. What I'm doing now is mostly like local colors, so I'm not so worried about what the colors are going to look like in or out of the shadows, because it's going to do that almost all by itself using the overlay layer, because it's going to kind of work with the tones in behind. The colors look really strong right now, but once I start to add a bit more of their surroundings, I think it's going to help it look a little more natural. You can see some of this I'm kind of feathering in the edges a little bit, pun intended, I guess. But yeah, just kind of feathering in the edges so I know where I have hard edges and soft edges. And I'm working with a really small kind of palette, I guess, on this piece, kind of browns and yellows. I do go in a little bit more of a green direction here at some point, but what I've gone down and done now is grabbed a multiply layer and just adding some quick shadow over top, making sure that, you know, I can understand where my light source is coming from, and so I can make sure that it makes sense where the light is kind of creeping around the edges. You can cheat a little bit, and the reference wasn't lit like this. None of the reference pieces were lit this way. I'm just kind of playing with things a little bit. And here I do some playing with cropping because I want to figure out a good composition. I think this looks more interesting, more fun. I like to have characters kind of leading out of the frame rather than into it. It's a little more dynamic, I think. So now I'm going on with just a normal layer, and I'm just going right over top of everything and cleaning up edges. And you can see lots of it is just color grabbing with the eyedropper. That's when the circle kind of pops up, is when I'm grabbing colors with the color grabber, with the eyedropper. Because most of the tones I need to have there are there already from the overlay layer. So that I can just highlight and low light certain areas the way I want to. I'm just cleaning up like the feathers I had just kind of really chopped, really rough, and I want to leave some of them that way, but I do want to clean them up just a little bit, especially on like the foreground birds. It's kind of fun to build all these shapes and kind of try to imagine the feeling of you being there. You can see me zooming out in and out sometimes. Sometimes I like to just kind of view it as a thumbnail, really small, really zoomed out, so that I can kind of see the composition a little bit more. And then, you know, zoom in for a little bit more detail here. Just finding the edges on my feathers. I'm going for more of kind of like a, I don't know, traditional wildlife kind of painterly look on this piece. So I don't want too many like hard black lines, the drawn on black lines, which is more like, you know, if I'm looking for more like an illustrated kind of style, or more of a like cartoon or something kind of style, then you're going to have these hard black lines. But for more of like a traditional kind of feel, I want less black lines and more like hard and soft edges created with the colors and values rather than just like black on white. That's what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of creating a, you know, more of a variation in colors and tones, but at the same time also smoothing out certain things. The feathers shouldn't look so choppy, I think, you know, a little bit more patterned and controlled. You can see I work backwards here a little bit too, just cleaning up some of my edges by color grabbing some of the background colors and just drawing them right in on the same layer. Here I needed a little bit of separation between those two birds. I think that made a really big difference, right over kind of the shoulder of that middle ground bird, if you want to call it that, with the downward facing wings. And here just cleaning up a little bit. I don't want that back one to be too defined, so you can see I'll add detail and then take it away, and add detail and take it away. So I just want that one to be kind of almost silhouetted with kind of a transparency in the feathers. With feathers, you can really get carried away with, you know, making them like the perfect shape and the perfect organization and everything. But my preference is to just draw them on, kind of understand the patterns and understand what they would look like if they were all perfectly laid together, but then kind of go over top and just sort of play. Adding some blue tones into the background. Kind of a nice contrast to all the warms that we have going on everywhere else. Now what I'm doing now is I got an airbrush. I didn't like that. Too defined. And I'm just darkening up in behind the grass with kind of a dark green color. You kind of imagine almost some some forest or something blurred out from the background. And I'm actually going over top and adding some more light so it looks like it's like seeping through the feathers and darkening the bottoms a little bit. I really want that light to look like it's really pouring through between the feathers. So that's going to require what I'm working on now, some dark edges and some highlights on those wing feathers coming down. And same thing, grass sticking up in any way is going to have some shadow coming down. I'm just darkening that up a little bit. Add a little bit more detail to the grass. Again, I want it to look fairly loose and painterly, so I'm not getting too carried away with the detail on here. You can see how detail can kind of be built in multiple ways. You could carefully go in and draw it out, or you can just layer and layer and layer, and then it naturally builds all by itself. And that works great in Photoshop or even with acrylic paint or watercolor or anything where you can really build layer upon layer, charcoal. You know, a lot of the traditional skills transfer over to Photoshop really well. So again, just going back and forth, figuring out where I need more shadow and more light. Now I've got a lighten layer on, and I'm just going to add a little bit more of a touch of light coming from the light source, which is, you know, early morning sun. I realized at some point that I completely forgot to draw the tail on that first bird that we laid the line down for. But here again, I decided a little bit more definition on those feathers, and there it is, all nicely kind of laid out. I like the light on it, and yeah, I just think it's kind of fun. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and that image. If you want to make a request, head on over to my Instagram at CABRAAM. Give me a follow, and you'll see opportunities in my story to request a image. All right. Like, subscribe, and comment.